About Harry. Chapter 31. I need your help. The minister lived in Diagon Alley, in what was a bit short of a villa, the only one there. All other habitation were 3 or 4-story buildings with shops underneath. This one, on the other hand, was a beautiful white imposing building with marble columns at the entrance, big windows, and an air of great splendour. At the gate, 2 orcs with a sour look were guarding the entrance. Harry hadn't even taken the invitation letters out of his pocket that, after a glance, they let him pass. He crossed quickly the green well-kept garden, since, as usual at dusk, some Cornish pixies were zooming back and forth, ready for mischief. The door was opened by a house elf dressed smartly. Those who worked for the minister weren't enslaved, but paid for their jobs. Browning had been the first minister in adopting this line of conduct, which assured, with a simple move, Hermione's sworn allegiance. When he was elected and took possession of the house, the minister had the privilege to inhabit it only as long as he held the position. He had perpetuated the proper brainwashing on the house elves working there until they were sufficiently convinced freedom wasn't necessarily a disgrace. Only then he gave them the uniform that set them free. This very tiny formal house elf welcomed him cordially inside. A statue with the shape of a centaur in the act of rearing with a bow in his hands ready to dart an arrow was adorning the entrance where a majestic flight of stairs would bring to the upper floor. He was illuminated by hundreds of gleaming candles, all supported by ornated candelabras. The place was grand, made to impress foreign visitors, and Harry, despite envying the location and the garden, thought it even too grand. One of those places where it's difficult to relax. Especially because, besides the house pompous style, Ginny had insisted in wearing a formal wizarding robe that made it even more difficult. She had chosen for him also the colour, a bottle green, to enhance your eyes, she had said, smiling, adjusting the folding while he was trying to conciliate himself with the idea of spending evening nodding to nonsense and smiling to jokes in an uncomfortable outfit. He never felt at ease in those formal wear. The absence of trousers made him feel naked despite the ankle lengths, and he didn't think that the shape of it suited him, even though Ginny asserted the opposite. A second house elf accompanied him to the parlour where already few wizards were congregated. The minister, spotting his arrival, beamed and abandoned immediately his conversation with an old bald wizard wearing an eccentric blue robe to greet him. Browning concerned himself straight away about Ginny's absence and the broken Fidelius charm. The news had reached even him, and offered the use of his house if he could be of any help, at which Harry refused immediately, politely yet firmly. Nothing would ever have induced him in such a step. Rather than that, he would have preferred to live happily under the same roof with Ron for the rest of his life. After this brief exchange of words, the real hassle started. He was brought about the room like some sort of ornament, introduced to everybody until dizzy with names and niceties, and stared at so much that if possible to consume somebody by looking, he would have already disappeared 5 minutes after his entrance. There were representatives of Bulgaria, France, Germany, and many countries besides. The head of the Magical Cooperation Department was fussing to have everybody at ease and talk business in a non-stop flow while their glasses were refilling by magic as soon as they were empty. Harry had to fight the temptation to get profit of this dangerous continuous refilling, taking only as much alcohol as necessary to get through the stiffness of the evening, but without getting too squiffy. At one point, he was leaving his mind free to wander, while a broad man was trying to kill his audience by boredom, ranting in a strong guttural accent about some utterly uninteresting new regulation about the use of copper for scales, when Browning brought forward Hermione, introducing her as the diplomat for Romania. In a normal circumstance, Harry would have been delighted. She could have been the lifesaver of the evening. But as things were standing, faithful to Ginny's wishes, he only nodded her briefly and turned his attention again to the boar on two legs, assenting every few seconds and returning with his mind to the lonely island dream. After an hour or so of this penitence, they were taken to the dining hall. A very long table was in the middle of it, covered by posh silverware, immaculate serviette, and decorative flowers every 2 or 3 seats. The minister was sitting at the end of the table. On his left his wife, a very courteous yet silent little witch, and on his right there was obviously him. And, thinking to do something welcome, he had seated Hermione just beside. A most awkward arrangement. The dinner started straight away on the worst footing. As course after course of fancy food would appear on their plates from nowhere, questions and affirmation, one worse than the previous one, started to pour from every side. Lily's death was told of with the same sensitivity as if the result of a Quidditch match was canvassed. Harry tried to detach as much as possible, avoiding participating and answering courtly. He felt like shouting, "Hoy! This is my precious little girl you're talking about!" But forbearance was required, and he forced his food in his throat and tried to ignore it. He noticed on his side Hermione fidgeting. She was greatly irritated, sensing Harry's distress, but it was similar distress to the one she was feeling, being the wife of the man that had caused the death. Not many people were aware of the connection, but still a few sentences were pronounced not very flattering on regards of Ron. Despite his affirmation that had been an accident, the present company kept on gaily in their abuse, convinced to voice Harry's feeling. But Harry, despite hating Ron, hated as well to hear all the people totally unconnected to them to speak ill of him. He wanted to have the exclusive in his dislike and only in his head. He was a rancorous, solitary feeling that he didn't want to share. When finally the topic burned out, thanks to the minister's wife that at one point, seeing Harry and Hermione fixed expression, surfaced from her silence to put a stop to it, other subjects were touched upon and it was Hermione's moment to be budgeted. Not many women held prestigious position in the magical community, and there were many prejudices and sexism in the political environment. Women were in a minority, and in an evening as that one, most of them were there only in quality of spouses of somebody important. Some insolent remarks were made, and when she participated to some conversation, she was treated with contempt. Harry felt his blood boiling assisting to this behavior. Hermione had more brain than all those gits put together, and he couldn't bear to see her slighted. She, however, was unruffled by it, and answered either wittily or cuttingly to any impudence, throwing him very often warning glances as not to interfere. Nevertheless, when desert time approached, gloom was starting to have the better, and Harry felt the complicity that united them on that occasion. He glimpsed dejection and weariness on his friend's face when for the umpteenth time a sexy joke was brought forward. and in an impulse, wanting to convey sympathy and closeness, reached out for her hand under the table and squeezed it. She faltered for a moment, and then, without changing her serious demeanour, squeezed it back. They held each other's hand for some time, managing through the contact to ward off the unpleasantness of the evening, giving each other strength to affront the end of it. Harry came to terms with the fact that it was impossible for him to sever contact with her or behave with coldness. She was part of his life, like his wife and children, and it was useless to pretend otherwise. When dinner was over, he stood up eager to be gone as soon as it might be. But before that could be accomplished, he ought to speak with Hermione alone. He had taken a decision. In the bustle of leave-taking, he managed to whisper to her to meet him outside. He waited where planned, a dark corner of the garden, under a shed covered with ivy that protects them from prying eyes. And as soon as she was there, he said, eager, "I need your help." Chapter 32. Declaration of Love. "What did you just say?" It was early afternoon. Harry and Ginny were in the living room of Ron and Hermione's place. Harry had just got back from work and had found Ginny reading a book while sipping some juice cuddled up on the sofa, quite at ease and relaxed. Or at least she was so before his affirmation. Albus could be seen from the window in the garden helping Rose to climb a tree covered by red cherries. She had begged her parents to be left behind to spend some time with Albus. James was closed in his room. Ginny had backed up wholeheartedly his decision to ground him. They had got there only that morning, taking with them only what was necessary to their immediate needs. The house was spacious and with a country feeling about it. Furniture was squashy and comfortable, stone walls and immersed in greenery. It was a pretty spot. Ginny had chosen and furnished it. That helped her to feel at home there. Hermione and Ron didn't have enough time to leave some family touches beside the pictures scattered around the house. Arriving there that morning, Harry's eyes had fallen on one of their wedding day. He and Ginny were in it. He had been the best man for the couple. They had married very soon too, despite not as soon as them. They were about 20, they wanted a place of their own, and it seemed at the time the proper step to take. Both families were really keen on it, and they were still in that phase where the bickering was only something that was enhancing the pleasure of making up after it. They seemed really taken with each other and looking forward to a domestic partnership. For the first few years it had worked, or at least it seemed working from the outside. He and Ginny had already had James when things started to go downhill. The incompatibilities were beginning to show. Hermione was a workaholic as much as Harry back then. She aimed to a position in the ministry and was working hard to achieve it. Ron had tried to become an hour or two, but he hadn't worked. Tests were challenging, and Ron had failed most of them, despite Hermione had put her best effort in helping him, like with Harry. Probably it was then, now that Harry got to think of it, that Ron's resentment toward him that had already sprouted in school had started to grow. Harry had managed in what he didn't, supported by his wife that had kept steadily to help him all the way through after Ron had long been discarded. Ron had consoled himself with the money brought from the joke shop, but he didn't like Hermione being always at work, and wished her to drop career to be a housewife. A wish at best unreasonable, knowing Hermione. Succession of row after row in those years were beginning to wear down the relationship. Rose had been a blatant attempt to recuperate the wedding, And strangely enough, it had worked. Ron was born to be a father. He, unlike Harry, was overjoyed at the prospect of it, and had been unusually sweet and caring in Hermione's regards. She had put in all her career to take care of a baby Rose, and it seemed that the child had healed the breach that had started to separate them. But unfortunately, he hadn't last. Hermione's wish to return at work became pressing. For her, being confined at home with the only company of a child was depressing. Her overacting brain needed challenge. She had resumed her career as soon as it was possible, helped by eager grandparents that were even too happy to take charge of Rose. Ron, after the first moment of unusual sweetness, had returned to his usual lack of effusions, and the job in the shop was starting to weigh over him. The crumbling process that had started before Rose was resumed where it had been left. Hermione, like Harry, had started to work less hours at the ministry, but it was still very far from being an housewife. After a few years, Hugo had been conceived in another attempt to gain the same result as the first time. He didn't work as well as before. The relationship was probably beyond repair by then. The arguments were getting more bitter and nasty, and the kids were suffering from it. Harry and Ginny could see it all, but didn't know how to help them. Harry wondered, looking at those pictures, when exactly Hermione had fell in love with him, and if it was a genuine love or only something born by her growing frustration for a relation that couldn't give her what she craved. I said that from today I'm going to spend every day with Hermione until I do find a solution for the house, Harry answered to an angry cat Ginny with already all her fur standing up and hissing mentally. He had gathered all his courage to announce his decision to Ginny, knowing how angry she would have been. But he was steady in his purpose. He was sure that with Hermione's help a solution could be found, and he wasn't going to throw it away only because of her jealousy. We are going to go to Hogwarts to do some research, and hopefully something useful will come out. There were a few libraries scattered around the country, but none as good as the Hogwarts one. It was the biggest and more complete, and if there was a spell that could help him, he was sure it was in one of those books. It wasn't open to public, usually being reserved for students, but in summer it was easier to get a special permission. Why can't you do it by yourself? Ginny continued in her hissing, while perusing her book in a mock calmness revealed so by a ferocious slapping of pages. Because Hermione has got triple my brain. Even in the likely case I would find what I need, it would take me forever to put into action without her. He wanted to sit close to her, but was afraid of a paw. Well, I don't think you should, or considering. The poor book was paying dire consequences of his daring. He paused, reflecting on what to tell her. He wanted her to understand how unreasonable her fears were, at least regarding him. He had never been in love with Hermione, never felt more than a strong sisterly affection. He didn't know why it was so. It would probably have been normal in their situation falling for each other. But it hadn't happened. He had a very high opinion of her. She was smart, funny when she cared to be, strong and determined. She was good-looking too, despite not exactly his cup of tea. She had everything to attract him. But she never did. Love wasn't there, and he was sure it could never be. They shared everything in their respective life, even their body during the forlorn year of estrangement from the rest of the world, because at that moment it was what they needed from each other. They longed for that closeness, and Harry, after the first moment where Ron found it out, didn't regret it anymore. It felt natural and right to him now to have shared even that with her. It united them even more in their friendship. But he didn't have that kind of desire any longer. When he was close to her, or even touched her, there wasn't that sparkle, that shiver that was always there with Ginny. He couldn't even sit close to his wife without wishing for a contact. He just couldn't keep his hands from her. She filled his mind continuously, creating a bundle of powerful emotions. That was the something more was missing in his relationship with Hermione, and that made their friendship exactly that, only a friendship. Ginny, he started in saying, kneeling on the floor in front of her, who was still with her eyes fixed on the book. What you are feeling will never happen. I can love nobody but you. I've always loved nobody but you. No matter how much time I spend with her, if I hug her or not, if I kiss her or not, you will always be the first and only one. She kept her gaze on the book, without reading it. His words had sorted some effect. She had relaxed her position and her frown had dulled a bit, but it wasn't completely disappeared. She nevertheless wished for you, love you. And when you are with her, she has not the same feelings that you have got for her. And I don't like that. She is smart. She knows that nothing will never come out of it. She knows how much I love you. I never made a mystery of it. If she decides to stay in my company, it's at her own risk. She didn't speak, without moving her gaze from that book that, after having been mistreated in the first rush of fury, was resting now limply in her hands. Harry took it, shut it, and put it aside. He grasped her hands in his own. Ginny, listen to me, he entreated her, and when finally her almond eyes met his own, he resumed his speech in eagerness. You can have everything out of me, everything. All myself, my love, my body, my soul, everything is yours and it will always be. You can claim any of those anytime and I'll never deny to you. They are already yours to keep and do whatever you want with it. She will never have it. She can wish for it as much as she wants, but it doesn't change it. She will never own me, as I'm owned by you. A silence followed this declaration, a silence charged of significance. And while he was staring at her, tried to convey all his sentiments, that somehow he never felt to have fully explained, being no word strong enough for it, tears started to pour from her eyes, sliding fast on her cheeks. After the first moment of consternation, he laughed. Why are you crying? She sniffed, and in a wail she answered, I don't know. And after having brushed away her tears with the back of her hand, she started laughing too. Chapter 33. Hogwarts. He was in front of the Hogwarts gate, waiting for Hermione, who was late in arriving. It was a long time since the last time he had been there, and memories were popping in his mind in rapid succession. And it was an alternation of pleasant and unpleasant, funny and sad, elated and tormenting. But the prevailing sensation was nostalgia. Nostalgia for a castle that had been his first real home, where he had made his first friends, where he had found a place where he wasn't an intruder or an undesirable. He knew that it was going to be an afternoon full of this wing of sentiments, and he felt excited and wary at the same time at the thought of it. Hermione was beside him a few minutes later, apparating with a crack. Sorry, I had some troubles with Ugo. He didn't want to let me go. How come? A bit disoriented, I believe. You know, England, Romania, England again in a different house, the barrow. I'm sorry, he said guiltily. Most of those whereabouts had been because of him. If you can stay, it's all right. I can manage by myself. Don't be silly. It's okay. And I'm not 100% sure you would manage by yourself anyway. You and Ron have never been that quick with the research in the library. Harry smirked. What about the ministry? Don't you need to go there? I'm a freelance, remember? And this is more important. More important than international diplomatic exchanges and the possible capture of Dark Wizard? Definitely! Harry chuckled. Okay then. He took his wand, closed his eyes, and concentrated on the new baby about to be born. Its possible face, the first time he would have held it in his arms. He opened his eyes and shouted, Expecto Patron! And the silvery phoenix shot out from the tip of his wand and flew toward the castle, bringing the news of their presence. A phoenix? Hermione asked perplexed. Wasn't it? It changed, he interjected flatly. Hermione arched an eyebrow. Classy. Harry burst out laughing. They saw McGonagall walking briskly toward them, auster-looking, but with a smile in seeing them she was trying very hard to suppress. Potter! Granger! She greeted them, opening the gate and letting them pass. Hello, Professor! Harry answered cheerfully, being delighted to see her again. She was getting old, but was still imposing and energetic as back in the Hogwarts days, and he felt a rush of affection toward her. I'm not a professor any more, Potter. I'm headmistress, she said sternly. But then she softened. But I dare say you reached an age where you can call me by my first name, if you so wish. If you will call me Harry, he replied dry. I cannot call you anything but Potter. I cannot call you anything but Professor. So be it, she replied, still with a repressed smile, beckoning them to follow her on the path for the castle. I'm following your vicissitudes on the newspapers. The magic community is scarcely talking about anything else, and consequently the students. Harry didn't answer, being even too aware of it. I'm sorry to hear about the Fidelius charm. It's a serious grievance, Harry assented. It would have been helpful to ask for Professor Flitwick's help, but he is enjoying his retirement in Mexico. I'm sure, however, that with Granger's head, if there is something that might be apprehended, you will be able to find it. I hope so too, he said, smirking to Hermione on his side. They approached the castle, and the motions were getting stronger. It was exactly as he remembered it. After the battle, it had been rebuilt in the same shape. Hagrid's hats could be seen in the ground, and a pang of nostalgia pervaded him. Hagrid was no more. A new caretaker had taken his place and was inhabiting the hut, but Harry didn't know him. Just behind lay the forest, where so many perils had been met. He wondered if Ron's car was still in there, somewhere. And then his mind fixed itself on a thought he had tried to cast away since Lily's death, a tempting yet dangerous recollection. He almost stopped walking, his gaze attracted by those trees hiding something that would have allowed him to bring back his little girl from the rain where normally it was impossible to return. A stone. No, not a stone. This stone. The second of the Deathly Hallow. The one that could bring her back. That alluring consciousness had been there since he got out from his madness. He had awoken one morning, and it was there. born from nowhere, and he had discarded it fast, not allowing himself to indulge in it. But now it pushed its way in his mind, causing an internal argument. You don't know where the stone had fallen. It could be a lifelong research, his reasonable voice stated. Wouldn't be worth, though, to have her back? A second voice argued. She would never be back as you remember her. The fourth boy opposed. It would still be better than nothing at all. The second one retorted. Is it? Do you want her back as a sad, cold figure you wouldn't even be able to hold? Do you want to bring her back here to suffer in a world where she cannot be dead and cannot be alive either? Is it what you really want? No, it wasn't. The stone ought to stay there where nobody could ever find it. He would have taken the secret in the grave. He resumed his step briskly. Hermione, thinking he had hesitated because of Hagrid, smiled at him sympathetic. A sad smile, he returned. This secret hadn't been revealed, not even to her. Potter, I should probably thank you to have dropped on my lap the loose cannon that is your eldest son. Harry smirked. I'm sorry, Professor. We are trying to check him, but he's a bit of a handful. I noticed, she only replied, opening the big doorway to let them pass. She closed it behind them, and the echo of the sound reverberated in the vast entrance. The hourglasses containing the stone for the house points were empty on their right, as the dining hall on their left. Of course, what happened on Christmas might be one of the reasons, she said cautiously. He was vivacious before, but now he's stored in an earthquake. That might be a reason. Yes, Harry answered, feeling uneasy. There was an awkward pause, and Harry knew what was coming and braced himself in having to hear what he still caused disquiet. I'm really sorry for what happened, Potter. It's a great loss, she said, patting slightly his arm in a comforting way, and that, coming from her, was like a tight hug and a smacking kiss. Thank you, Professor, he answered, trying to bring his thought to something else. Anything else. Your Albus is a dear, though, very polite and gentle. Harry smiled. Yes, I've got the couple, the angel and the devil. What about the one is about to come? We don't know yet, but judging by the strength of the kicks, I'm inclined to think he's more on the devil's side, he sniggered. In the meanwhile, Hermione was on the threshold of the dining hall, indulging in nostalgic reverie, and McGonagall, noticing, proposed a walk through the castle before to accompany them to the library. They accepted cheerfully, and she conducted them about, shifting her attention to Hermione, complimenting her for Rose's performance. She had taken Hermione's brain and thirst of knowledge, and in that first year, despite the difficulties encountered, she had already shined. They started a conversation about her potentials, to which Harry decided not to participate to be able to enjoy recollection freely. He tried to ban the painful ones in favor of the others, but it was difficult to accomplish. In all the happy ones, there was Ron. They walked in the empty corridors, greeted enthusiastically by paintings. Nearly Headless Nick was overjoyed to meet Harry again, and accompanied them for a trait of their walk, retreating only when called from the Fat Friars for a hunting session. They found themselves in no time in front of the fat lady. They swung the door open without the need of any password, and they were soon in the common room. Where it lay the strongest feeling of them all. Being there, in that room, where so many chats had been done, So many schemes formed, so many jokes and laughs had taken place. It was just amazing. He caressed his favorite armchair in front of the fire, where so many times he had sat doing homework. The fire where he had talked to Sirius, the corner where Fred and George test their merchandise. It was a torrent of images swirling fast in his head. McGonagall suggested a visit to their old rooms. They started with Harry's. The four-posters bed were still there, but it was completely different now that some other boys were inhabiting it. Different posters on the walls, and a few belongings left there to be found the following year. When about to go to Hermione's one, Harry remembered about the stairs transforming in a slide if a boy dared to approach them, and pointed out his impossibility to follow. But McGonagall only stared, saying, "You are with me, Potter. Don't forget it, and I'd like you to accompany us. There is something I would like you to see." She made a complicated flick with her wand that allowed Harry, that was wondering what she could possibly want to show him in the female dormitory, to follow. When she opened old Hermione's room, Harry swore loudly. Both Hermione and McGonagall stared disapprovingly, but he didn't even notice his surprise at what she saw being too great. The walls were literally plastered with him, glowing, laughing, staring at her. He was surrounded by himself. Pictures had been cut from the magazine. Some enlargements were made, and they were covering every inch of the walls. They had counterfeited the ones where it was with Ginny, substituting her face with pictures of them. Spooky. Very spooky. Looking better, Phil Jerk was there too, together with the beater of the Chudley Cannon, plus some others Harry knew only slightly or didn't know at all. All staring curiously at them, some waving, some scowling, some winking alluringly at Hermione. The Phil's one. What a surprise! He was paralyzed in the middle of the room, with his mouth half open. Hermione was contemplating unconcerned their old room. Probably it didn't appear much different from when she was there, with different subjects, obviously. Perhaps Gilderoy Lockhart. When the first surprise was over, Harry felt, in spite of himself, reddening. Hermione, seeing this, started to chuckle. "It's hot in here," he gabbled, trying to justify his splash. Hermione's chuckle transformed in a burst of amusement. Between gulps, she stammered, "Literally, very hot indeed." Harry flushed even more. "For God's sake, Hermione, drop it!" McGonagall was struggling to repress the laugh that Harry's embarrassment was provoking. "I thought you might have liked to see." She addressed him wry. "Okay. Right. Kind of freaky, perhaps, but okay," he stuttered, getting another glimpse at his many self. "I wonder how they can possibly sleep serene at night with all these men staring," McGonagall said, now with a prim expression on her face. Harry, thinking about Regina's letter, knew exactly which kind of serene sleep they were having. Those were all groupies in training. "I considered to ban Witch Weekly, but I was afraid to make the situation worse," McGonagall admitted. "I don't see how it could get any worse," Harry said under his voice, starting to recover from the embarrassment. Then, out of the blue, an idea struck his mind, and in a fit of mischievousness he added, "Actually, there is an easy way to make it worse." A quill appeared from thin air called by his wand. With it, he signed every picture of him he could reach. He restrained himself from writing injuries on the Phil's one, scribbling witty remarks on some of them, especially the ones where Ginny's face had been substituted. Hermione followed him in his enterprise, giving suggestions on what to write. When he was done, he made disappear the quill and pocketed the wand, looking around the room satisfied. A small welcome back present, he sniggered cheekily. McGonagall frowned displeased as her plan to destabilize Harry had suddenly backfired. "We'd better go to the library," she muttered rather sullen, surely thinking about the uproar she would have needed to control once the girls would have been back from summer holiday.